Hi there, my friends, and welcome to Master of Horror, the channel that brings you the scariest paranormal stories that you will ever come by. Join me on a journey into the depths of the paranormal with these 5 scary, true, paranormal and ghost stories. Number 50. True, scary, paranormal story number 1, The Outhouse. Around the mid-1920s, my great-grandparents, Amelia and John Ramirez, married and moved into an old 2-story house in the country in South Texas. They were excited and looked forward to starting a family and starting their new lives together. But about a week after moving, they would encounter a string of events that altered their lives forever. My great-grandmother said they would hear noises around the house that she couldn't explain. One night, they heard something walking on their roof. They would also hear something walking around their house in the early morning hours. John would come home really late, around 9 p.m. Amelia, my great-grandmother, dreaded being alone in the house. Everything changed for the both of them one night, around 3 o'clock in the morning, when John needed to use the restroom and had to go out to the outhouse. Just for context, an outhouse was a restroom that was outside the house, so people would have to go outside to use the restroom. It was pretty small, the size of a bathroom stall. My great-grandfather John got up in the middle of the night and went outside to use the outhouse. When he was done using the restroom, he opened the outhouse door and saw his wife walking towards the outhouse where he was. They eventually passed each other by. He said, as they passed each other by outside, she had a straight face. He figured she must really need to use the restroom. He made his way back into the house and began walking up the stairs, and that's when he heard coughing coming from their bedroom. He was wondering to himself, who could that be, since his wife was outside? When he opened the bedroom door, that's when his heart completely stopped. He saw his wife Amelia, asleep, laying down in the bed. He slowly walked over to her and told her, "Didn't you just go outside to the outhouse?" Confused, she replied, "No, I've been sleeping here the whole time." Just then, they heard the back door to the house open and slam shut. That's when John ran and locked their bedroom door. While he was still standing by the door, they heard someone or something walking up the stairs slowly. He jumped on the bed with her. When the footsteps reached the door, their doorknob began turning as if something was trying to open the door. John and Amelia both held each other tight, staring at their bedroom door, knowing that something or someone was on the other side of the door. It finally stopped, and they heard the footsteps go back down the stairs. They did not sleep that entire night, and were hearing noises all around their house downstairs. As soon as the sun came up the following morning, my great-grandfather said the back door was still locked, as if no one ever came in. That morning, they moved out of their house, never to return. Scary, true, paranormal story number 2, The Haunted House on Milton Drive. After we moved into our house, many paranormal things began occurring. Every morning, my daughter would come into my room and jump on my bed to wake me up. She's 6 years old. One morning, she came in my room. I couldn't see her, but I could hear her. I was wondering why she didn't jump on my bed. So I looked towards the foot of my bed and saw the top of her head as she crawled around the foot of my bed. I could see her blonde hair moving slowly from one end of my bed to the other. The most scariest part was that the top of her head was actually gliding across the foot of my bed. I was in shock. I yelled out, "Emily, stop playing, sweetie." Then I jumped over the bed to find nothing there. I went into her bedroom and saw that she was still asleep. I was petrified to the core. I could not explain what just happened. That day, I officially knew my house was haunted. A couple of weeks later, around 2 in the morning, I was awoken by a sound in my hallway. I got up to check on Emily, and she was on the top of the stairs looking down. I could only see the back of her head. I called out to her, "Emily, what are you doing?" She didn't say anything. She then began slowly walking down the stairs. I walked up to her and called out her name again, "Emily." Again, she did not respond. When she got down 2 more steps, I decided to touch her shoulder. I'll never forget what I saw that night. Just thinking about this and writing this down terrifies me. She turned around slowly and looked up at me. She had no face. It was only skin and hair. No nose, no mouth, and no eyes. I screamed and quickly ran into my daughter's room, and there she was laying in bed sound asleep. I woke her up and took her to my bedroom and locked the door. She was confused and asked me what was happening. I didn't want to scare her, so I told her everything was okay. After having several blessings done on the house, we still have minor paranormal encounters, but nothing like that night. True, scary, paranormal story number 3, the Lechucha. My great aunt, Diana Velez, had said this story to me once. She lived in Richmond, Texas around the 1960s, before it was a huge city. At that time, there was lots of country area. She said she went outside and began doing something when she heard a noise right above her head in a tree. Something was whistling and making weird noises. She couldn't see what it was, but began to get chills all over her neck and arms. She ran inside the house and got a flashlight and went back outside and pointed the light towards the tree. What she saw petrified her. It was an owl with the face of a woman. It had black eyes and was looking directly at Diana. She grabbed a rake that was leaning against the tree and hit the bird out of the tree. The bird, now known as a Lechucha, began cursing in Spanish and yelling and screaming at my aunt. My aunt ran inside to call her husband, but when they both came back outside, the Lechucha was gone, and there were only blood spots and feathers left on the floor where it was hit. She couldn't believe what she had seen and what happened. She said later on that week, she went to a grocery store in the nearby city and felt that someone was staring at her. She said she turned around, and at the front door of the grocery store, there stood a woman dressed in all black with black hair. The woman had a black eye and a broken arm in a sling. She gave Diana, my aunt, an angry, awful look, and then she walked away. Diana said she doesn't know if that woman was the Lechucha or if she was linked to what happened that scary night in Richmond, Texas. Scary true paranormal story number 4, the creature. Me and my father would go hunting in Texas all the time. We would go hunting a lot, and I was taught everything I needed to know about hunting and about the woods. This took place when I was 17 years old. One night, everything changed my mind about the woods and about hunting outdoors. We had just got done hunting, and we decided to go back to our cabin to get some rest. And we were supposed to go back home that following morning. As we went to sleep, I was awoken around 2 or 3 in the morning by something walking back and forth on our cabin porch. We were in the middle of nowhere, so it was impossible for anyone to be on our porch. Again, we were miles and miles away from any civilization. I woke my father up, and he turned off the nightlight in the room. I was petrified, and I know he was too. My dad whispered to me not to make a sound at all, but I did the unthinkable after sitting there for a couple of minutes. I had the urge to get up and to look outside the window. I finally mustered up the courage, and I slowly got up and I walked over to the window. I pulled back the curtain to the window, and when I looked, I saw something that I will never forget to this day. What I'm about to tell you is something that not most people would ever believe. It was a black creature. It had antlers, and it was staring right at me with red glowing eyes. All I remember is screaming and closing the curtain shut. My dad ran and got his rifle. He hurried up and opened the door to the room, but before he opened up the front door, I stopped him and I told him, please don't go outside. He insisted and continued outside with his rifle. I wanted to follow him, but he told me to stay inside and to grab my rifle but not to leave the cabin under any circumstances. So I did exactly what he said. He slowly opened the front door and he walked around the cabin but could find nothing. After about 5 minutes of me waiting for him to return back into the cabin, he finally came back. He explained that there was nothing out there, but that he did believe me, and we eventually went back to sleep with our rifles in our arms. He fell asleep on the floor and I fell asleep back on the bed. Little did we know, that was not the end of our night of terror. We woke up an hour later, hearing something pacing back and forth on the porch again, but this time it was actually running from one end of the porch to the other very quickly. It actually sounded like hooves of an animal rather than human feet. It sounded like it was running with 2 legs and not 4. We did not know what it could be. We heard a noise by the front door as if something was trying to open the door. That's when my dad told me the shock of my life. He explained that he forgot to lock the front door when he came back in from outside earlier. We then heard the front door open to the cabin and something walking around the living room and the kitchen area. My father slowly locked the bedroom door. We grabbed our rifles and laid silently on the bed facing our rifles towards the bedroom door, waiting for whatever it was to come in. After about 10 minutes, we finally heard whatever it was walk out of the cabin. That following morning, when we opened the door to the bedroom, we were in shock at the mess that we encountered. The dishes were all over the floor, cracked. There were scratch marks on the floor and on our roof, and you can literally see the marks and imprint of hooves walking in and out of the cabin. We still go hunting, but we will never go hunting in that same spot ever again. True, scary paranormal story number 5, The Devil in My Truck. In 1986, around December in Texas, I was driving down the freeway off of 59 going north. I was coming from Arlington, Texas. I came from visiting my family, and I was headed to Houston while I was driving down this long stretch of road. I saw a young lady walking down the freeway, and I noticed that she was all alone, and I thought to myself, this got to be a joke. What girl would be walking down the freeway around this time at night? I slowly pulled over, and she turned towards me. Right away, I rolled down the window to the passenger side, and I asked her if she needed a ride, and that I was headed towards Houston. Right away, she exclaimed that her car had broken down, and that yes, she needed a ride. She then got in the truck, and she didn't look scared or nervous. She was fairly attractive and was dressed in casual clothes. I started driving, and I told her the obvious, that I was surprised to see a girl walking alone on the side of the highway. She grinned and didn't say anything. I continued to drive my truck for about another 10 minutes. It was really awkward because she wasn't talking and I really didn't know what to say. So I asked her if she wanted to listen to any music. She looked at me and nodded her head up and down. So I grabbed the tape and I put it in the cassette player. After we heard a short song, I ejected the tape from the cassette player and it fell to the ground of the truck. That's when I reached over to grab the cassette that was on the floor. I looked down really quick towards the floor because I could not feel the tape, and that's when I saw something that terrified me to the core. I noticed her legs and feet were not of a human. She had goat legs and black fur on them, and she had hooves for feet. I couldn't breathe, and my face went cold, and the hair all over my body stood straight up. I grabbed the tape off the floor and sat back up in my seat. My heart was pounding. I slowly looked over towards her and noticed she was staring right at me, grinning. That's when I looked back at the windshield and kept driving, thinking, what the hell do I do now? I'll never forget the words that came out of her mouth. She said, "Are you afraid of me?" At that point, I couldn't move. I just continued to drive. Her head the whole time was turned towards me, and I knew she was staring at me. I had to think fast, so I did something to this day I'm glad I did. I slammed on the truck brakes, reached over and opened the truck door. I lifted up my foot and I kicked her out of the truck immediately. I didn't even close the truck door. I drove off, going up to about 100 miles an hour. After about 3 minutes of driving, I then heard something ram against my truck. I looked through my rearview mirror, and there she was, practically flying right behind my truck. I had thought I lost her. When I looked back to the rearview mirror, she was no longer there. I turned towards my left, and that's when I saw her face looking right at me through the driver door window. I thought to myself, how could this be? Am I having a nightmare? I kept going faster, possibly even hitting 120 miles an hour. I turned back towards my window, and I noticed she was no longer there. I stopped at a gas station. I took a deep breath and gained my composure. To this day, nothing comes close to what I experienced, and I now know all the paranormal things that are talked about are real. I experienced it myself, and I'm fortunate enough to be able to tell this story to everyone.